They call it the clean version of hell. A fortress built in the middle of the Colorado desert, where sunlight barely touches and sound dies in the walls. Inside, the most violent, dangerous, and notorious criminals in America are locked away, not just from the world, but from themselves. This is ADX Florence, a place so secure, even the guards call it the tomb. No one escapes, no one reforms, and some say, no one truly survives. Welcome to hell on earth. The story of ADX Florence doesn't start with construction, it starts with chaos. By the early 1990s, the U.S. prison system was falling apart. Across the country, violent uprisings were exploding inside maximum security facilities. Gang wars, hostage situations, and organized murders. In 1983, 2 guards at the Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois were killed by inmates on the same day. That event would change American corrections forever. The government's answer was simple: if we can't control them, we'll contain them. Out of that idea, ADX Florence was born. The birth of America's supermax. Construction began in 1991 on the outskirts of Florence, Colorado, a small, quiet town surrounded by mountains and desert winds. It looked peaceful from the outside. But underneath the surface, something much darker was being built. The blueprints were not designed by architects alone. They were influenced by behavioral scientists, military strategists, and psychologists, people who specialized in breaking down the human mind. The result? A prison designed to eliminate not just escape, but resistance itself. Every hallway, every wall, every cell was calculated, not for efficiency, but for control. When it opened in 1994, the government called it a new standard in inmate management. But inside the Bureau of Prisons, staff had a different nickname: the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The structure of control. ADX Florence houses around 400 inmates, but it feels empty. There are no crowds, no yards filled with prisoners, just silence, steel, and routines that never change. The facility is divided into several units. General Population, Z Unit, where inmates are monitored 24/7 through cameras and sensors. Special Security Unit, H Unit, reserved for terrorists and the highest-risk inmates. Control Unit, where the most defiant or violent prisoners are kept in permanent isolation. Each cell is roughly 7 feet wide and 12 feet long, smaller than a parking space. Concrete bed, concrete desk, concrete stool. The toilet, sink, and mirror are built into the wall, unbreakable, unmovable, and always cold. A 4-inch wide slit window gives a view of nothing, just sky. It's angled upward, so prisoners can't see the ground, the mountains, or anyone else. There are no bars, no keys, only remote-controlled steel doors that open with a buzz. Everything is automated. Even the guards rarely speak. A day in the tomb. Life inside ADX follows a clockwork precision, the same every day, every week, every year. 5:30 a.m., lights on. No switch, no sunrise, just artificial fluorescence flickering alive. 6 a.m., breakfast slides through a small slot in the door. The inmate eats alone, then paces the length of his cell, back and forth, over and over, 4 hours. There's no work, no contact, no human voice. Only the hum of air vents and the sound of his own heartbeat. For 23 hours a day, the prisoner remains in his cell. For 1 hour, if allowed, he goes to recreation. That means standing alone in a concrete pit with mesh wire overhead, a box so small, inmates call it the cage. They can see only one thing: a patch of blue sky. No grass. No horizon. Just a reminder that the world still exists. Somewhere far away. Who ends up here? ADX Florence was built for one reason: to hold the men who couldn't be held anywhere else. Over the years, its population has included Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, America's most infamous domestic terrorist; Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker of 9/11; Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing; Richard Reed, the shoe bomber; El Chapo Guzman, the drug lord who tunneled out of 2 Mexican prisons before landing here. Robert Hansen, the FBI agent turned Russian spy. Terry Nichols, the Oklahoma City bombing co-conspirator. These men have shaped history, and now they spend their days staring at gray walls. For the guards, it's like watching ghosts drift through time. No talking, no touching, no life. A world without sound. In ADX, silence is a weapon. It isolates. It confuses. It crushes. A psychiatrist who studied the facility once said, "The sensory deprivation here is unlike anywhere else on Earth. It's not punishment, it's annihilation. There's no chatter, no movement, no noise, not even the sound of footsteps, thanks to soft flooring and sealed doors. When inmates speak, their voices echo back at them like ghosts. Some scream for hours. Others go completely quiet. Over time, psychologists say, the mind starts to eat itself. Hallucinations begin. Paranoia grows. And eventually, reality bends until the inmate becomes his own shadow. ADX isn't just built to confine the body, it's built to erase the self. The guard's perspective. Even for the staff, ADX takes a toll. They rotate shifts constantly to avoid institutional burnout. One former guard described it as working inside a morgue where the bodies are still breathing. They're trained never to show emotion, never to connect. Everything is monitored, every hallway, every cell, every move. And yet, despite the fearsome reputation, ADX has a strange calm. No riots. No escapes. No noise. It's the quiet that's most dangerous. Because silence isn't peace, it's control. The price of perfection. ADX was meant to be the ultimate solution to prison violence. And in many ways, it worked. No one has ever escaped. No riots. No major incidents. But what it accomplished in security, it sacrificed in humanity. A former warden once said, "It's not designed for rehabilitation. It's designed for total separation from society." Inmates here don't just serve time. They cease to exist. And that's why, inside these walls, one truth echoes louder than any scream. No one leaves ADX Florence unchanged. The men who built the monster. The blueprint for ADX Florence wasn't drawn in silence. It was written in blood. In the 1980s and early 1990s, America's prisons were overflowing. Gangs controlled entire blocks. Riots were weekly. Guards were dying on the job. Politicians, desperate to look tough on crime, promised something new, a way to lock away the worst of the worst. Behind closed doors, they called it the end of human contact. On paper, they called it administrative maximum. But to those who would later serve inside its walls, it would be known simply as ADX, a place where time stopped, where identity was erased, and where justice blurred into punishment. The Spark. Marion, Illinois, 1983. It started on a cold October morning at Marion Federal Penitentiary. Marion was the most secure prison in America at the time, until it wasn't. 2 guards, Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman, were brutally murdered by inmates within hours of each other. The killings shocked the entire Bureau of Prisons. The men responsible? Members of the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang known for its precision and brutality. The message was clear. If the prison couldn't control them, they would control the prison. Marion went into permanent lockdown that same day. Inmates were confined to their cells 23 hours a day, the very first test run of what would become the supermax system. For the Bureau of Prisons, Marion was no longer sustainable. They needed something more extreme. Something unbreakable. Something no man could outsmart. That's when they began sketching ADX Florence. The design of psychological warfare. The design meetings for ADX weren't like normal architectural sessions. The men around the table weren't just engineers, they were behavioral scientists and penologists, experts in human breakdown. Their question wasn't, how can we keep them inside? It was, how can we make them never want to leave their cell again? They studied sensory deprivation experiments from the CIA's MKUltra program. They examined psychological evaluations of long-term solitary confinement. They even reviewed military interrogation techniques used during the Cold War. What they built was a masterpiece of psychological control. Angled windows, preventing any line of sight or orientation to the outside world. Soundproofed walls, removing any sense of human proximity. Automatic locking doors, removing even the sound of keys, a trigger for hope. Indirect lighting, reducing natural sleep cycles and creating chronic disorientation. ADX wasn't designed to punish the body, it was designed to quietly dismantle the mind. One of the architects would later admit, "Every square foot was designed to remind the inmate that he has no power." The political weapon. By the early 1990s, crime in America was at its peak. Politicians were campaigning on slogans like, "Lock them up and throw away the key." It was an era when fear was a political currency, and ADX Florence was the perfect symbol. When the facility opened in 1994, cameras captured the sleek new structure. Clean concrete lines, razor wire glistening in the Colorado sun. Reporters called it a technological marvel. To the public, it was justice at its finest, a fortress for monsters. But hidden behind that image was something darker. Inside, psychologists warned that indefinite solitary confinement could lead to psychosis, hallucinations, and irreversible brain damage. No one cared. Congress wanted results. The Bureau wanted control. And for a while, it worked. There were no riots, no murders, no noise. ADX became the model for dozens of new supermax prisons across the United States. It was the future of incarceration, efficient, silent, and completely invisible. The hidden builders. But who really built ADX Florence? One of the lead designers was Burton Cohen, an architect who specialized in high-security facilities. But Cohen wasn't alone. Behind the scenes were experts in behavioral architecture, people who studied how buildings affect emotion. They borrowed ideas from psychiatric hospitals and military installations. Colorless walls, no symmetry, no visible horizon. Design elements meant to induce hopelessness. The average inmate's path from bed to toilet to door was precisely measured to prevent pacing rhythms. The goal was simple: remove all sensory patterns. No rhythm. No sound. No change. Without rhythm, psychologists say, the human brain begins to collapse in on itself. The shadow influence. There's another layer to the ADX story, one that's rarely talked about. The design of ADX Florence coincided with the rise of domestic terrorism in the United States. After the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, federal officials needed a place to hold terrorists, somewhere escape-proof, bulletproof, and invisible to the world. The answer had already been built. ADX became a quiet part of America's counterterrorism strategy. A black site in plain sight. Foreign nationals, domestic extremists, cartel bosses, all sent to vanish inside the walls of Florence. For the first time, punishment wasn't just about retribution. It was about erasure. A prison without witnesses. ADX's location was no coincidence. Florence, Colorado, sits nearly 2 hours from Denver, surrounded by desert, wind, and silence. No neighbors. No noise. Just isolation in every direction. Inmates couldn't hear cars, planes, or birds. They couldn't even hear each other. The silence became its own form of suffocation. A former warden described it best. You can scream all you want. Nobody hears you. Not even the walls. Even the town nearby feels haunted. Locals call it Prison Valley. Within a 30-mile radius, there are 4 federal prisons, including ADX. The local economy thrives on incarceration, correctional officers, suppliers, transport contractors. Yet ask any resident, and they'll tell you, ADX feels like it's not part of the world at all. It's something else. Something that hums beneath the sand and concrete, like a buried machine that never stops running. The birth of the human experiment. In the early 2000s, reports began to surface. Inmates at ADX were developing severe mental illnesses, hallucinations, memory loss, self-harm, even suicide. The Bureau of Prisons denied it for years. But leaked medical files told a different story. Inmates who entered ADX sane were leaving broken. A 2007 study found that prolonged isolation led to psychosis in up to 60% of inmates. The effects were irreversible. Their minds were literally rewired by solitude. One psychologist who toured the facility said, "This isn't incarceration. It's psychological decomposition." But to the system, ADX was still a success. Quiet, controlled, efficient. The perfect product of the men who built it. The irony of control. By creating a system to contain the most dangerous men, America had also created a system that destroyed the human mind. The architects had built something perfect, a machine that never malfunctioned. But perfection came with a cost. Inmates began filing lawsuits, claiming cruel and unusual punishment. Human rights organizations called ADX a clean Guantanamo. Even former wardens started speaking out, admitting that the prison goes too far. Yet the Bureau defended its design. These are men who cannot be controlled any other way. But the truth was simpler. ADX was built to control fear. And once the walls went up, even the people who built it couldn't look away. Inside the mind, the slow death of sanity. When the gates close behind you at ADX Florence, there's no sound, just a dull metallic echo that fades into nothing. It's not the silence that gets you at first. It's the realization that it will never end. For most inmates, the first few weeks are bearable. The routine, the repetition, the isolation. But then something begins to change. The world stops feeling real. And slowly, the mind begins to rot. The first phase, the echo. Psychologists who study long-term solitary confinement call it the echo. It's when the brain, starved of stimulus, starts creating its own reality. It starts small. The hum of the air vent becomes a whisper. The flicker of light seems to pulse with meaning. Shadows start moving, not violently, but rhythmically, almost as if they're breathing with you. One inmate described it like this. "At first, I thought the vent was leaking air. Then I realized it was talking. Not words. Just my name. Over and over. This isn't imagination. It's science. The human brain is built for interaction. When you take away sight, sound, and touch, the mind turns inward and begins to hallucinate itself." In one case, an inmate wrote that he began to see colors that didn't exist. Another swore he could hear his mother's voice in the static of his intercom. For many, it's the beginning of what psychiatrists call SHU syndrome, named after special housing units in supermax prisons. Symptoms include paranoia, anxiety, insomnia, and visual hallucinations. In severe cases, the mind loses its grip on time altogether. At ADX Florence, this isn't an exception. It's the design. The case of Jack Powers. Jack Powers was a U.S. Army veteran. He wasn't a terrorist or a serial killer. He was a man who made a series of bad decisions that spiraled out of control. Convicted of bank robbery and escape attempts, he was sent to ADX Florence in 2001. At first, he believed he could survive it. He read books, wrote letters, meditated. He was strong. But ADX doesn't fight you head-on. It waits. After a few years, Powers began to deteriorate. He wrote in one letter, "I used to feel the sun. Now I only see it as a line across the wall. I talk to my reflection in the steel mirror. He's the only one who answers." He began cutting himself, writing messages on the wall in blood. Not for attention, but to prove he still existed. God said he would whisper to the concrete. Doctors said he was delusional. But inside ADX, that's the normal progression. You fight, then fade. After more than a decade, Powers was transferred to a lower security facility. He was alive. But as his psychiatrist later said, the man who came out was not the man who went in. ADX doesn't just hold people. It empties them. The anatomy of isolation. Every cell at ADX is designed to eliminate sensation. Walls absorb sound. Doors block vibration. Even the lights are diffused to remove shadow contrast, the very depth your eyes need to feel grounded. Dr. Stuart Gracian, a Harvard psychiatrist who studied inmates in long-term isolation, called it a slow neurological strangulation. He wrote, "The human mind begins to implode. It's not madness in the traditional sense, it's a collapse of cognitive function. The brain starts eating itself to fill the void." MRI scans of inmates who spent years in supermax conditions show measurable shrinkage in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and emotion. In other words, isolation doesn't just change the mind, it physically restructures the brain. And ADX Florence is isolation perfected. No visual stimuli. No tactile feedback. No sound beyond your own breath. It's not punishment. It's erasure through architecture. The living ghosts of H-Unit. The most infamous section of ADX is H-Unit, the prison within the prison. It's where the most dangerous or politically significant inmates are kept, the national security cases. Men like Zacarias Moussaoui, the 9/11 conspirator, and Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade Center bomber. Each cell is identical. Reinforced concrete walls, bulletproof glass door, 24-hour video surveillance. They can't see or speak to each other. Even their air vents are soundproofed. Guards communicate through an intercom, monotone, procedural, robotic. When inmates are escorted out for their 1 hour of recreation, they never cross paths. Each one is led through a series of locked chambers, alone, silent, unseen. A former warden once said, "If you dropped dead in your cell, it might take hours before anyone noticed." In letters smuggled out through lawyers, one inmate wrote, "I don't dream anymore. I think in gray." Another wrote, "Time has no meaning here. I measure my life in meals and echoes." For these men, punishment is no longer about the crime. It's about disappearance. The lawsuit that broke the silence. In 2012, a group of ADX inmates filed a federal lawsuit, Cunningham v. Bureau of Prisons, accusing the facility of violating the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. Their claim: that ADX was knowingly housing severely mentally ill prisoners in conditions that guaranteed their deterioration. The lawsuit revealed shocking evidence. Inmates smearing feces on walls. Prisoners mutilating themselves with razors or shards of metal. Men swallowing glass, batteries, even nails to get medical attention. In one documented case, an inmate screamed for help for 3 straight days before dying of self-inflicted wounds. No one came. The court eventually ruled that ADX must provide better psychiatric care. The Bureau of Prisons responded by creating a small, mental health step-down program. But critics say it changed nothing. Because how do you fix something that was built to break you? The guard's dilemma. Even the guards, men trained to be stoic and detached, aren't immune. They start developing symptoms similar to the inmates: paranoia, insomnia, anxiety. One officer admitted, "It's not the inmates that scare me. It's the silence. It follows you home." Some turn to alcohol. Others quit. A few transfer out and never speak of it again. In one rare interview, a retired ADX lieutenant said, "People think this is the safest place in America. It's not. It's the loneliest. When the mind snaps." For the inmates who lose touch with reality, there's no therapy, no comfort, no recovery. They are simply moved to observation units, where cameras record their every movement. Even their breakdowns are bureaucratically logged. A former prison psychologist described walking through one of these corridors. Every cell was a mirror of despair. One man was talking to a drain. Another was rocking back and forth, reciting his own case file. And one had drawn a window on the wall, and was staring through it. The doctor paused before adding, "You could hear your own heart in that hallway." It was like walking through a mausoleum for the living. The collapse of Ted Kaczynski. Even the most intelligent minds couldn't survive ADX unchanged. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, a man who eluded the FBI for nearly 20 years, lived out the last chapter of his life there. He refused mental health evaluations. He refused contact. He spent 23 years in silence, until he was transferred due to illness. In 2023, he was found dead in his cell. The man who once declared war on modern society died in perfect isolation, surrounded by the very technology he feared most. The irony was almost poetic, and completely tragic. The unseen question. ADX Florence is often called the end of the line. But maybe the real question is, what line are we crossing? Is this justice? Or is it vengeance with electricity and concrete? Because when a man spends decades alone, stripped of every human sense, he doesn't come out reformed. He comes out hollow. And if the goal of prison is to protect society, what happens when the system starts producing men who are ghosts? Alive, but already gone? OUTRO, the tomb beneath the Rockies. Deep in the heart of Colorado, the mountains stand quiet. And beneath them so does something else. A machine of concrete and steel, humming with fluorescent light and human despair. A place where sound doesn't echo. Because even echoes need something to bounce off. Inside, hundreds of men live their final years staring at gray walls, their minds unraveling in silence. ADX Florence isn't just a prison. It's a mirror, showing what happens when security replaces humanity. And in that silence, one question lingers. If this is what it takes to feel safe, how much of our soul did we trade to build it?